Somebody taught you that your ancestors came from tribes, villages, huts, people with no writing, no law, no government, waiting around to be discovered. That's not a mistake. That was written on purpose by the same men who filled out the ledgers we're about to read. Because here is what the shipping records actually say. The parishes of Jamaica were buying, decade after decade, from 4 specific stretches of coast, and every one of those stretches was drained by empires. States with standing armies, courts, taxation, ambassadors in Rome and Lisbon, 15 surnames, 15 parishes, and the kingdoms the paperwork points back to. Now, let's be precise, because this is where most channels start lying to you. I am not going to tell you that your surname means you're descended from a king. It doesn't. Your surname came from an estate, and the estate came from a man who owned it. We've covered that. What the records can tell you is which parish bought from which port, in which decade. And that matters enormously, because West Africa in those decades was not a blank space. It was a map of states, and some of those states were collapsing. And when a state collapsed, its defeated class went onto ships. Not, you were royalty. Something better, because it's real. You came from somewhere that had a government. Here's what most people never got told. 2 archives, and they locked together. The 1817 slave registers, every enslaved person in Jamaica, by name, age, estate, and parish. Updated every 3 years by law. That gives you the parish. And the shipping records, the voyage-by-voyage database of the Atlantic trade, showing which African port each ship loaded at, and where it unloaded. That gives you the coast. Put them together, and Jamaica splits into 4 corridors. The Gold Coast, modern Ghana, Ashanti, and Fante country. It fed Westmoreland, Hanover, Trelawney, St. James, St. Elizabeth, the Bight of Biafra, the Niger Delta, Igbo territory, the ports at Bonny and Old Calabar. It fed St. Thomas, St. Mary, and the later North Coast. The Bight of Benin, Yoruba and Fon country, modern Benin and southwestern Nigeria, Portland especially, and West Central Africa, the Congo River, and the coast below it, Congo and Mbundu people, Clarendon and St. Catherine, heavily in the later decades. 4 corridors, 4 completely different political worlds. And the parish your family was registered in tells you which one you're looking at. 15 surnames, counting down. Stay for number 2, because it points at a specific year, 1701, when one Akan kingdom destroyed another, and the losing side's ruling class was sold in numbers that show up directly in Jamaican estate books. And number 1 points at a kingdom that had been Christian for 150 years before any of this, whose king wrote a letter to the King of Portugal demanding it stop. That letter still exists. I'll read you what it says. Before we start, comment your surname and your parish. That comment section has become a map. Savlamar, Bamboo, St. Anne, Newmarket, Port Antonio, Catadupa. People finding cousins they'd never met underneath a YouTube video. Parish is the key to everything in this video. 2 people with the same surname on opposite ends of this island are looking at coasts 1,500 kilometers apart. All right? 15 down to 1. 15. Sherwood. We start with a name that is also a place. Sherwood is English, the Shire Wood, the forest. And in Jamaica, Sherwood Content is a district in Trelawney, on the northern edge of the Cockpit country. It is where Usain Bolt was born. Trelawney's estates bought Coromantee, the British name for Akan people shipped through the Gold Coast forts, in some of the heaviest concentrations recorded anywhere in the Americas. And Akan country was not villages. In 1701, The Ashanti Empire was founded there under Osei Tutu, with a capital at Kumasi, a standing army, a treasury built on gold, and an administrative structure that the British would still be fighting 3 separate wars against in the 19th century. That's the corridor. That's what Trelawney was buying from. 14. Linton. Linton is English and Northern, a place name from the flax settlement. In Jamaica, it sits in the southern parishes around St. Elizabeth and Manchester. St. Elizabeth bought through the Gold Coast more consistently than almost anywhere in the Caribbean. And on its northern edge is Accompong, the maroon town that forced a British treaty in 1739, still standing, still self-governing, still marking that treaty every January the 6th. The people who founded Accompong came off those same ships. They just got off the estate first. 13. Valentine. Valentine comes from the Latin valens, strong, healthy. It arrives in Jamaica through the English planter class and spreads thinly, which makes it traceable. It sits mostly across the central and southern belt, Gold Coast corridor, with a growing west-central share as the 18th century wore on. And that shift matters. It happened because the Gold Coast could no longer supply what the plantations demanded. The Akan states had stopped losing wars at the rate the traders needed. Read that sentence again. The supply of human beings depended on which African kingdom was winning. 12. Boyle. Boyle is Irish. O Bowighill, one of the old Gaelic families of Donegal. The Irish presence in Jamaica is real and much less discussed than the Scottish one. Cromwell shipped Irish prisoners here in the 1650s. Others came as indentured labor, overseers, and eventually planters. Boyle settles mainly in Clarendon, the Central Plain, where the largest estates on the island operated, and where the registers show that later, heavier wave from West Central Africa, the Congo and Mbundu peoples. We'll come back to Congo. That's where this video ends. 11. Hutchinson. Hutchinson is Northern English, a diminutive of Hugh. In Jamaica, it turns up across the eastern parishes, and the east is Biafra country, the Niger Delta, the ports at Bonny and Old Calabar. Now, Igbo society is often described as having no kings, and that's half right. It was decentralized, but decentralized is not the same as ungoverned. There was the Kingdom of Nuri, whose priest-kings held religious authority across a wide region for centuries. There was the Arrow Confederacy, a trading network with an oracle at its center that coordinated commerce across hundreds of miles. Complex, negotiated, layered systems of authority. Not an absence of government, a different design of it. 10. Dixon. Dixon is son of Dick, border country English, and one of the earlier ordinary surnames to appear in Jamaica. It spreads across the east and center. Biafra corridor again. And here is something the planters wrote down themselves. Contemporary observers in Jamaica cataloged the people they bought by origin and made confident, ugly generalizations about each group's temperament and usefulness. Those documents are repulsive. They are also evidence, because to write them, the planters had to admit that the people they were buying came from distinct societies with distinct traditions. You cannot describe a difference without conceding the thing exists. They wrote down the proof while trying to deny it. 9. McFarlane. McFarlane is Scottish. From the shores of Loch Lomond, it arrives with the 18th century Scottish influx. By the late 1700s, roughly a third of white men in Jamaica were estimated to be Scots, and it settles heavily in the western and central parishes, which puts most McFarlane families in the Gold Coast corridor, Ashanti and Fante country. And here's a detail worth holding on to for later in this video. The Fonte were not subjects of Ashanti. They were a rival confederation on the coast, and the wars between them are the reason the ports were full. If you enjoy exploring stories like these and want to learn more about your own ancestry, take a look at the ebook linked in the pinned comment below. It was created to help you uncover the history behind your family name. And every purchase also helps support this channel. Thank you. Now, let's continue. Because the next 6 names are where the corridors stop being geography and start being politics. And number 8 is the one that surprised me most. 8. McLeod. McLeod comes from Skye and Lewis in the Hebrides, and the name itself is Norse before it's Gaelic. In Jamaica, it lands in Clarendon and the Central Plain, big estates, bulk purchasing, and consequently some of the clearest shipping records in the whole archive. Clarendon's pattern is the layered one. Gold Coast Akan early, then a rising share of West Central Africa, the Congo Basin, as demand outgrew supply. So, a McLeod family from Clarendon is very likely looking at 2 arrivals, decades apart, from 2 entirely different political systems, ending up on the same property. That's not dilution, that's a merger of 2 histories, and both of them are yours. 7. Robertson. Robertson is Highland Scottish, Clan Donaghide, out of Perthshire. A commenter gave me Robertson out of Portland, on the northeast coast, and Portland is the most distinctive corridor on the island. Its estates were smaller, and it never bought in bulk. What Portland's registers show instead is a notably high share from the Bight of Benin, Yoruba, and Fan country. And that region held 2 of the most formidable states in West Africa. The Oyo Empire, a Yoruba power built on cavalry, which at its height controlled a territory larger than England. And the Kingdom of Dahomey, with a standing army that included a corps of women soldiers the French would later fight and lose to. Portland is also nanny country. The Windward Maroons fought the British to a treaty in 1739 under a woman commander in mountains the army could not march through. Make of that what you will. 6. Nelson. Nelson is son of Neil. A commenter gave it to me out of St. Elizabeth, in the Newmarket district. Gold Coast corridor, deep and consistent, for 150 years. And here is the specific thing about Akan society that shows up in Jamaica over and over. It was organized around a military structure with defined ranks and a chain of command. And it was matrilineal. Inheritance and political legitimacy ran through the mother's line. Now think about the Maroon Wars. Think about Nanny. Think about how a scattered population of enslaved people on properties miles apart repeatedly organized campaigns coherent enough to force a European empire to sign treaties. That doesn't come from nowhere. It came off the ships. 5. Morrison. Morrison is son of Morris, Scottish, from the Hebrides. In Jamaica, it concentrates in Kingston, and Kingston is the exception to this entire video. The wharves at Kingston Harbor were the single largest disembarkation point for enslaved Africans anywhere in the British Caribbean. Ships came in from the Gold Coast, from Bonny and Old Calabar, from Luango and the Congo River, and unloaded here. Kingston didn't specialize. It received everything. So a Morrison family out of the capital isn't looking at one kingdom. They're looking at all 4 corridors at once, and that's not a weaker answer. It's a bigger one. 4. White. White is one of the oldest surnames in the English language, and it appears in Jamaica almost immediately after 1655. A commenter gave me White out of Manchester, the youngest parish on the island, created in 1814, 3 years before the registers began. Manchester is high country. Coffee and pimento, not sugar. Smaller properties, which bought people already on the island, rather than direct from ships. So Manchester's African ancestry is inherited from Clarendon and St. Elizabeth. Predominantly Gold Coast, arriving second-hand. Which means, if you're a white out of Manchester, your trail almost certainly runs through a neighboring parish first. That's not a dead end. It's a specific instruction about where to look. 3. Walker. Walker is English and occupational. Someone who trod woolen cloth in water to thicken it. A commenter gave me Walker out of St. Mary on the north coast, and St. Mary is where the largest uprising of the 18th century Caribbean began. Easter, 1760. Frontier and Trinity Estates. A man the records call tacky. And this is the part that matters for this video. Contemporary accounts describe Tacky as having been a chief, a man of rank in Fante country, taken and sold like anyone else. Whether every detail of that is exact, the pattern behind it is documented and undeniable. The Atlantic trade was fed by war, and the people a war produces are soldiers and the losing side's leadership. The planters were not importing labor. They were importing defeated armies, and then acting surprised. 2. Anderson. Anderson means son of Andrew. It's one of the most widespread names in Jamaica, and a commenter gave it to me out of St. Mary as well. Now, here's the year. 1701. In Akan country, the Ashanti Empire under Osei Tutu destroyed the kingdom of Denkyira, until then the dominant power of the region, and absorbed its territory. In 1730, they did much the same to Akwamu. When a West African state collapsed in that era, its defeated population did not simply become subjects. Enormous numbers were sold, and the ports on the Gold Coast handled the volume. Those are the exact decades in which Jamaica's western and northern parishes were buying most aggressively through those same forts. So, no, I cannot tell you that you are descended from the court of Denkyira. Nobody can, and anybody who says they can, is selling you something. What I can tell you is that the ships were loading at those forts in those years, that the parish your family was registered in was buying from them, and that what was being loaded included a state's entire administrative and military class. That is what the records support. And it is enough. 1. Blake. And number 1, Blake has 2 origins. The English one from Blek, dark, and the Irish one from the tribes of Galway. Both arrived here in the 17th century. In Jamaica, it sits across the Central Belt, Clarendon and St. Catherine, which puts it in the West Central African corridor. The Congo River, the Kingdom of Congo. And Congo is where this whole idea of villages falls apart completely. By 1491, before Columbus, the Kingdom of Congo had converted to Christianity, not by conquest, by diplomacy. It had a capital city, a royal court, a written correspondence in Portuguese, and ambassadors resident in Lisbon and in Rome. In 1526, its king, Afonso I, wrote to the King of Portugal about what the slave trade was doing to his country. He described merchants seizing his people, including nobles and members of his own family, and asked for it to stop. That letter survives. It is in the Portuguese archives. It has been in a European filing system for 500 years. A Christian monarch, writing in a European language, to a European king, protesting the trade, a century before the English even took Jamaica. They knew. It's on paper. It's been on paper the entire time. So when somebody tells you your ancestors came from villages with no history and no writing, understand exactly what that is. It isn't ignorance, it's a filing decision. That's the thing nobody tells you about these records. Every line was written by someone who thought they were doing bookkeeping. The registers, the ship's manifests, the letters from Congo. Not one word of it was meant for us. And it's the only reason any of this is recoverable. The system that tried to make your family anonymous kept meticulous receipts. It couldn't help itself. Now the receipts are the evidence. I can't tell you that you're descended from a king. I won't, and you should be suspicious of anyone who does. But you didn't come from nowhere. You came from a place with a parliament, a treasury, an army, and an archive. And the proof isn't oral tradition. It's in Lisbon, and it's in Kew, and it's been sitting there the whole time. Put your surname and your parish in the comments. Parish is the key. Everything in this video turns on it. Your ancestors came from a kingdom. Somebody just filed the paperwork under something else.